Hey book lovers, my name is Em and I want to talk about books and cats. Welcome back, book lovers. So my husband is the best. He and I have both been working really hard lately and we've been under some stress. So he planned us a little overnight getaway. He found this tiny one-room cabin out in the middle of nowhere in Vermont, and it had an outdoor sauna. So say no more, sign me up. I had planned to read while we were on our little vacation. I really did, but I did not read at all. Honestly, I mostly just used the sauna and napped. It was luxurious. And we needed it so much. Things have been really stressful lately. Some good stress, some bad stress. And an evening of just sauna, sitting by a fire, and lots of sleep was just what we needed. I've also had a really good writing week. I've gotten myself a couple chapters ahead in Heart of the Storm, so I won't be missing an episode anytime soon. The original challenge was to write a chapter a week, but I've decided that I'm fine with writing more if I'm motivated to do so. I'm not going to stop the writing flow if it's happening. I'm still going to try to write every single week, but I'm just ahead, which is nice. I also started piecing together a new book that's been kind of rattling around in my head for the last couple years. It's changed form quite a few times, but I think I finally know how I want to put it together. So I've kind of tentatively begun that. It's going to be really different from my usual fiction, and I'm kind of still figuring it all out, but at least I've got it started, and I'm pretty excited about it. And then to top it all off, I also had a reaction to some medication that made me super dizzy for a short but very terrifying time. It made it impossible for me to read for a little while, which is not okay. I am feeling much better now, back to normal. But all of this is to say that I got very behind on reading this week. I had not read anything, but luckily when Andy and I got back from our little mini vacation, the UPS man showed up and he delivered a book of short stories that I had forgotten I ordered, called Salt Slow by Julia Armfield. So that's the book we're going to talk about today. So I adore short story books. I think short fiction is incredibly difficult to write well, and it truly requires like a skill set of its own. It's so different from any other style of writing. Usually, I would say that a book of short stories is probably like 25% really unbelievably good stories, and then the rest kind of vary from pretty good to like meh. I have no problem with this because I can appreciate the work and the structure of a meh story, even if I didn't entirely love it. I also enjoy trying to pinpoint what didn't work for me, so I really spend probably more time thinking about the meh stories. Go figure. So Salt Slow is comprised of 9 stories, and I really enjoyed most of them. There were 2 bangers that I absolutely loved, and only one that I felt kind of meh about. The rest were pretty good. This is all personal preference, of course. A couple of the stories I really enjoyed, but there were just like a couple things that were a little off for me. One of them was the title. It just didn't seem to fit the story, but I could see what the author was going for. And then another one, I loved the premise, but the ending just kind of annoyed me. But at the same time, I know that endings are incredibly difficult. And with this premise, it was kind of a hard thing to end, especially in a short story. It still just kind of bums me out when I've really liked something right up to the end, and then all I can think about is the ending not being that good. And then sometimes the title is perfect, like absolutely perfect, and there's one of those in this collection too. So I was trying to decide what the best way is to cover the stories in this book without giving anything away. I'm going to try to give you the basics as best I can, story by story. I'm sorry for any unintentional spoilers if they somehow slip through. I'm going to try my best not to spoil anything. Either way, read this book. Salt Slow is a gem. All right. So the first story is called Mantis. And it is about a Catholic schoolgirl who has an odd skin condition where her skin just kind of flakes away. And she's not like the other girls, though they have mostly accepted her until boys enter the picture. I'm going to leave that one there, but that one's a banger. It was so good. And such a good way to start a short story collection. So the next story is called The Great Awake. Something is happening in cities where people's sleep is leaving them and taking on a separate form. So then the human is unable to sleep. They're permanently awake. And then they just have this being that is their sleep just kind of hanging out. And sometimes they're fine, and sometimes they can be aggressive or annoying. They all have their own personality. I really loved the premise of this one, and it is really well done. This was the one that I mentioned earlier where the ending bothered me, but honestly, upon further reflection and rereading, I get it and I like it fine. It doesn't really matter because the premise of the story is so interesting. Next is the collectibles. This one was by far my favorite in the book. I love it, love it, love it. It is essentially about 3 women who are working on their PhDs. They live together and they're lamenting their ex-boyfriends. That's basically it, but it is so much more. And in my opinion, the best story in this collection. The next story is called Formerly Feral, and this one was interesting. Basically, it follows a girl who her parents get divorced and she and her sister are split. So she goes and lives with her dad. And then her dad marries a woman who has a pet wolf. I'm going to leave it at that, but it gets weird. The next one is called Stop Your Woman's Ear with Wax. I have mixed feelings about this story, which I think is a good thing. Writing should definitely make you think and feel, even if the feelings are conflicted. So let's see if I can sort this out. I really like this story. I would even say that I love it. It generally follows a woman who is traveling with an extremely popular female band and making a documentary. The way it is written also kind of comes off in a documentary style, but it didn't hit me immediately. So while I was reading it, it felt a little disjointed, but now that I look back on it, it makes more sense. I also didn't love the title. I get it. It's fine. I don't know why it bothers me. But then I'm kind of thinking that maybe it's supposed to have a documentary-like feel as well. I don't know. I love documentaries too, but in short story form, it was weird. But I also kind of love the premise of this one too. I'm very conflicted about this one. I spent a lot of time thinking about it, so well done. Okay, so that one was kind of messy. The next story is called Granite. So by the time I got to this story, I felt it completely necessary to question the constant use of meat in comparison to wall color. It's liver in one story, and now in Granite, the walls are veal colored. What is veal colored? Like, do a lot of people just immediately know what that is? I have no idea. I can't bring myself to eat baby animals. So I'm not entirely sure. I also was wondering if it was like the color of raw veal, which would be like obviously more red, I would think, and then or cooked, which would be brown, right? I don't know. So this story, if I'm being completely honest, was the meh one for me. It was good. It was well written. It just didn't work. But I'm also not a 30-year-old falling in love for the first time. I will say that this book is probably more for like the 20 to 30-year-old crowd, and I'm a little old for it. Still loved it. Anyway, Granite wasn't my favorite, but it was still a good story. The next one is called Smack, and I thought this one was pretty good. It was very realistic. It was sad. And I liked the weirdness of the ending. That was a good one. And then it ends with Salt Slow. I always think that the story that has the same title as the book always has a little more pressure on it to be good. This one definitely meets that requirement. It's an odd one. It's set in a dystopian future where the only surviving people live on boats because the land is completely covered with water. There are massive birds and large predators in the water, and the story follows a couple that are in a smallish boat. And throughout the story, the woman is pregnant and then she gives birth. It's really a fascinating idea, kind of terrifying considering climate change. And just, it was a really excellent story and a really nice way to end the collection. I think that's the most important. You got to have the good first and last. It's kind of like a play. Like they always say, the audience mostly remembers the beginning and the end of each act. So those are the parts that need to be really tight and really spectacular. Yeah, this book was really excellent overall. I love a good short story collection. And this one would be perfect by the pool or hopefully this summer at the beach. Yeah, I love it. Check out Salt Slow by Julia Armfield. It's fantastic. Now it's time for a quick break. Hey, book lovers. Do you want even more Books and Cats content? You can join the Patreon at patreon.com/booksandcatspod. That's books, the letter N, cats pod. It's $10 a month, and I'm adding new content every week or so, including original plays and ebooks, audiobooks, behind-the-scenes stuff, vlogs, book giveaways, cat videos, and anything else I can come up with. I'm currently working on an audiobook version of one of my short stories that is called And She Laughed, and that will be up on the Patreon soon. You can check it out at patreon.com/booksandcatspod. The link is also in the show description. Help support the podcast and get even more fun Books and Cats content. Welcome back, book lovers. So let's talk cat stuff. There is a farmhouse that is not too far away from where I live, and I drive by it some mornings when I take my dog for a walk, because I am a lover of all animals, not just cats. But anyway, I absolutely love this house because in the morning there will be at least a dozen kitties running around, and I'd say about 2/3 of them are black cats, which are my absolute favorite. It always makes me smile, and my dog gets really excited because he adores cats. It's very cute. My own fluffy black cat, Weird, was not impressed with my evening away from the house. He has this noise that he only makes for me. It kind of sounds like he's saying ma, but like he's yelling it as a cat, if that makes sense. It's nice that he missed me, but I was catching up on some work stuff and he came up and he made that noise at me and then jumped in my lap and would not leave me alone all night. It was a nice welcome back. Anyway, now it's time for the quote of the week. And of course, there's more than one because I'm obsessed. These come from an article that's called 150 Famous Writing Quotes to Awaken the Creative Muse. I put the link in the show description. I do love how sometimes just reading quotes can be the motivation you need to get back to it. Anyway, for now, I have chosen two that I really loved. The first one is from Annie Proulx. You should write because you love the shape of stories and sentences and the creation of different words on a page. Writing comes from reading, and reading is the finest teacher of how to write. And then the other one is from William Faulkner. Read, read, read. Read everything. Trash, classics, good and bad, and see how they do it. Just like a carpenter who works as an apprentice and studies the master. Read. You'll absorb it. Then write. If it's good, you'll find out. If it's not, throw it out of the window. I like that. So I guess I did quotes on reading since I had kind of a struggle with my reading this week. Although short stories was the way to go. That was a great book. So that is all for this episode of the Books and Cats podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you stick around after the music, there is a new chapter of Heart of the Storm. We're on chapter 17, and I love it. Please keep in mind, it is not edited. It's just my weekly writing. Thank you so much for listening this week, book lovers. Remember, on Sunday, there will be a new episode of Storytime with M, where I am sharing my book Feelers at the moment, a chapter or sometimes two a week. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, keep reading. Thanks for sticking around, book lovers. And now here's Chapter 17 of Heart of the Storm. Maz woke up slowly. Their eyes opened after some effort, and they waited for everything to come into focus. Their arms were held overhead, and their legs were wide and tied down tight. Their whole body was itchy. It was maddening. It was what had brought them back to consciousness. Now as things came into focus, they saw why. A sticky, scratchy substance encased their whole body and bound their arms and legs to other ropes of the fiber that were strung across the room. Maz groaned and tried to loosen their hands. The more they pulled, the tighter the bonds became, and the itching sensation grew to an unbearable level and burned their skin. Another groan escaped their lips. "Come on, time to wake up." Francie stood back against the wall and watched with open curiosity. She had watched the transformation from beginning to end, or almost the end. It was very close now. Mina had explained the steps in great detail. She had nightly terrors and would relive the first time she'd watched the process. The choice that she had made spontaneously led to the moment that had haunted her every night since. Francie had understood when Mina stopped sleeping. She had scoured the library for recipes for elixirs that were meant to stave off sleep. When those stopped working, she turned to the local valley magic workers and their homemade draughts. On one of her trips to a local medicine woman, Francie made a discovery that changed everything. Her relationship with Mina dwindled, and she delved into the internet for more information. Then she found the dark-hearted ones. Francie had seen immediately what they were and what they wanted. She also knew exactly how to play them. Mina, however, fell for their ploy. Long before Francie knew what the dark-hearted ones were, Mina had already promised them everything, and they'd asked for even more. Mina had delivered. They gave her the magic, the potions of youth. Francie had to wonder if it had really been worth it in the end. She assumed it had come far earlier than expected. Mina had been gone for days, and Francie had stopped looking for her. The darkness filling the valley was making its way toward the palace, and there was no way that Mina would return. It should have hurt her heart. Francie wished she could mourn Mina properly, but she felt nothing. Her heart was numb. She had wanted to love her mother, but she had been pushed away, only used when her powers were needed. Her powers were the only reason they kept her, and when she figured it out, they kept her out of fear. They couldn't turn her loose. She had too much against them. She had seen the girls, Manx's projects, Mina's sacrifices. She had been so filled with rage at first, but she held it in. It burned in a tight ball in her belly, a coal waiting for a gust of air to fan it back to life. And when that happened, the whole world would need to watch out. Francie smiled. It was almost time. Ke was slowly coming back to consciousness. His throat was sore and it hurt to swallow. His mouth was impossibly dry and tasted metallic and sour. His head was throbbing with a sharp stabbing pain in his temples. He felt woozy when he sat up, and the pain in his head doubled. He made a small whimpering sound and was extremely grateful that no one was around to hear him. He slowly took in the room. It was hard to concentrate. He could almost remember what happened, but not quite. His head felt murky. He struggled to remember his name. The room was not familiar. It was cramped and messy and smelled of dust and rodents. He wrinkled his nose. His eyes slid to the window, and he took in the blackness that was growing outside. That brought something back. Then a loud clap of thunder made him jump, and he heard the familiar sound of her laughter. It all came back in horribly vivid detail. Kiki was gone, probably Kevo too. He had tried to help, tried to save those girls. Then the marked one had tried to kill him. He grinned and rubbed his aching throat. He couldn't wait to see her again. He would be sure to show her how it was actually done. The laughter came again, louder. It sounded like it was in the stairwell outside the apartment. Ke broke out in a cold, clammy sweat. He felt the blood leaving his face. When the door burst open, he fainted. Thea drummed her fingers angrily on the table while Manx attended to the unconscious burly man on the floor. He waved some smelling salts under his nose, and the man woke up with a start. He sat up and gazed around the room in a daze. Thea snapped her fingers, and his eyes grew round as he focused on her pale, gaunt face. Death had come to the valley, and he was staring at the Queen. They had made a mistake, a big one, and now it was time to pay. "Hello, brother-in-law," Thea said silkily. "So very sorry for your loss." She paused and watched the pain pierce his heart. She wore a small, satisfied smirk on her face, but her eyes burned with rage. She leaned in until her face was uncomfortably close to his. And the many, many losses to come. Ke roared with rage. Whether against Thea or against his own bad choices, he didn't know. He just knew it felt good to scream. Thea waited for him to lose steam. His roar turned into a whisper, and his head dropped as the sound faded away. "Feel better?" she asked while rolling her eyes. She cast a look at Manx. The pallid face remained expressionless. He was dead inside. More so than Thea. She rolled her eyes again and sighed. "Well, that's enough dramatics. Wouldn't you say, dear?" Manx stood up straighter under her attention, and a thin, sickly smile crossed his face. "Absolutely." He took a small leather bag from his pocket and opened it. The needle he removed from the bag was long and shone in the light. The liquid inside was black and shimmered when Manx shook it. Ke made a small sound in the back of his throat. He scrambled backward until he reached a wall and pressed his back against it as if he could pass through it like a ghost. Thea shook her head in disapproval. "How could you, brother? My own family sacrificed me. For what? Youth? Beauty? How did that work out for you?" She placed a finger in the center of his forehead, and his markings burned like lava. Ke whimpered and squirmed, trying to escape his own skin. Thea released him, and he collapsed with relief. She kicked him in the ribs, hard. Ke barely noticed. No pain was even close to what he had just endured. Kiki, out of all of them, should have known better. I really thought she'd be on my side. She was always my favorite. "You tortured her," Ke managed to say. Thea raised her finger and smiled when he cowered in fear. "I never claimed to care for her," she said in her silky voice. "I just said she was my favorite." Manx slunk up beside her and bowed his head a little, offering her the needle. "Would you like the honors, my love?" he whimpered pathetically. "Obviously," she snapped as she snatched the needle from him and caressed it like a lover. "This is my favorite part." She plunged the needle into the meat of Ke's arm and laughed as he screamed. The inky poison worked quickly. It slipped into his markings, and the images burst, bleeding outside the lines and coating his body in the dark of the night sky. His eyes rolled back, and when he focused on her again, they were red and bulging. He was breathing heavy, like a bull, and his massive body grew even larger before her eyes. He threw back his head and howled, showing his long, sharp teeth. The transformation was complete. Thea moved toward the door of the shabby apartment. The creature that had been Ke was close behind, ready to do his queen's bidding. Manx hung back. When Thea stepped out the door, he moved quickly to a shabby decorative pillow sitting on a dusty chair in the corner. He tore the pillow open and pocketed the contents. He hoped he wouldn't need them, but it was better to have an escape plan. Just in case. And that is the end of Chapter 17 of Heart of the Storm, book lovers. Thank you again for listening, and make sure to tune in on Sunday for Storytime with M, when I will be sharing another chapter of my book feelers. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, keep reading.